just want to say good morning and welcome to our webinar today, Cybersecurity Insurance Basics for Growing Businesses. My name is Rob Schenk and I'm with Intelligent Technical Solutions. We specialize in helping small and medium sized businesses thrive by managing their technology, just enabling our clients to do their most important work, which is to grow their business without having to worry about the underlying tech and the underlying security platforms. A few housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded. So if you'd like to review some of the information later at your convenience, or if you'd like to share the webinar with some colleagues, we'll be following up with an email afterwards that will contain the recording. Happy to take questions during the webinar. There's a Q&A box in your Zoom panel. Feel free to go ahead and pop in questions there during the webinar. We'd like to make this as collaborative as possible. And we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. Alrighty here, so let's get rolling. So we're thrilled to have you join us for a deep dive into the world of cyber insurance and its really important and critical role in helping safeguard our businesses. Today, we're going to be joined by Todd Whitley. He's Senior VP here at Intelligent Technical Solutions. He has extensive experience in helping businesses leverage technology and secure their data. And also pleased to have us joined by John Reith. John Reith is Partner Success Manager for DataStream Cyber Insurance, and he's been expert in cyber insurance and looking forward to all the information that we're going to be able to share here today. So welcome to both of you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right, well, let's get rolling here. So in today's digital environment, understanding the kind of cyber threat landscape is really, really important. We need to know what's happening out there in order to have, we need to know what's happening in order to protect ourselves. So maybe Todd, I'll kind of start off with you. Can you maybe shed some light on what are you seeing as far as the current cyber threats that businesses are facing, and what's important and why is it crucial to go ahead and stay ahead of these kinds of challenges?
Yeah, and, as you know, we work with clients and prospects on a regular basis, and really for the last 10, 15, even 20 years. And we've just seen a pretty significant uptick in cyber threats over the last 3 to 5 years or so. Everyone's heard of ransomware, and there's a lot of kind of fraud efforts and things of that nature that we see. A lot of times, threat actors will gain access to a company's email without them realizing this and start monitoring email conversations, and they're specifically looking for things, discussions between people that deal with finance, and they're able to actually monitor those email conversations, and then at the last minute pose as one of the employees in that discussion, maybe a finance director or a CFO, and they'll make some request to change funding directives or something of that nature. And it's not even a fake email, it's actually an email from that organization, so it's very difficult to detect. So what we kind of see that's missing in that is some countermeasures like multi-factor authentication, which would really help prevent someone losing their credentials in the first place and having someone kind of sneak in and monitor their email. So that's something that we really spend a lot of time working on to try to mitigate that risk. That's probably the big one. I would say also that just not really having a clear view of their overall IT environment. We do regular assessments that help kind of identify those. So it's kind of a constant vigilant effort to, things change. So you need to kind of stay on top of that. And then finally, there's not always an incident response plan, and not all businesses have the proper cyber insurance policy that can be kind of a stopgap, if everything else fails. So.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of kind of blocking and tackling kind of stuff, fundamentals, really having those kind of basics in place, right? Because that really tends to lower risk.
Yeah, I mean, email is one, and then there's just, having a good cyber awareness training program in place can go a long way toward educating staff. And you can have a fully educated staff, and then you hire somebody new and you really don't know, well, what do they know about cyber awareness? So it really needs to be part of even kind of their HR onboarding process. And there's software and tools that can make this relatively simple, but it's kind of almost a cultural shift in a company to be aware of cybersecurity and to really think about, what can we do to mitigate some of this risk. And today we're talking about cyber liability insurance, which is one of the ways that the business itself can help protect the business from a bad outcome.
Great. John, what are you seeing from the cyber insurance market perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from the cyber insurance side of things, I mean, cyber insurance is a good indicator in and of itself. Just the fact that more and more SMBs are starting to see it as a requirement in the business world is a real indicator of the attack increase that we're seeing in the SMB space. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but I like to tell customers we were always heading in a direction, as more and more business was done in the cyberspace, you're going to get more bad actors there. And eventually we were going to be in a spot where everybody, not just enterprise folks, were going to need to take cybersecurity seriously. It's just we had a bit of a fast forward button with the pandemic and everybody suddenly working remote, and there was a lot of opportunities. And so we're here now. We're really seeing the numbers, and even on the insurance side of things, when you're looking at the total claims that are coming in, it's really across the board. There's not even a specific size of company that you could point to. It's like, okay, this is the most targeted size, company right now. It's truly across the board, happening everywhere. And yeah, this occurred during the pandemic, but really was a result of, the bad actors noticing that, hey, we can kind of shift gears to the SMB space because they're not taking cybersecurity seriously at all, while the enterprise, on the opposite end of that spectrum. They have been taking cybersecurity seriously for a while, actually have things like cyber insurance in place and all of that. So during that pandemic, we really saw that shift. That's when we saw this development of ransomware as well. So it really comes down to, if you have any sort of data or can't afford to be down, well, suddenly if they can shut you down or get a hold of that data, now they can ransom you. So it doesn't necessarily even matter how much money you're bringing in annually. That's not even necessarily why they're targeting folks anymore. It's probably the third reason that they're looking at SMBs in that space. So yeah, that's really why we're seeing the increase in, questions or curiosity and the acquiring of cyber insurance in the SMB space.
Yeah. Alrighty. Like, as far as getting into the world of cyber insurance now, this is a confusing topic. It's kind of murky for small business owners. So maybe John, at a high level, can you start talking about, what cyber insurance is? Why is it, so important?
Yeah.
I know in some of my experience, I think, Todd, we've talked about this before, there's kind of standalone policies, and then you can have these riders. So maybe kind of talk through that a little bit. And
Yeah, absolutely. No, because it is an ambiguous space. As I said, it was a bit of a fast forward button, and insurance markets in general typically work at a snail's pace. And so what you're seeing right now is truly an unstandardized market in the cyber insurance space. Every carrier is a little different in terms of what they're offering. And a lot of carriers have typically two offerings where they'll offer what's called a rider, which is a synonym for an endorsement or an add-on on top of your general liability policy. And typically, not always, but they'll also offer a standalone policy. Some carriers offer just the standalone policies, some offer just the riders. A lot of them offer both. But you really want to look for a standalone policy, because when we compare the two, they're vastly different. These add-ons on top of your general liability, it can be very tough to even say that it's better than nothing, because they're typically 50, maybe $100,000 in coverage, and with the average cost of claims nowadays coming high above the 500,000, really broaching the $1 million mark. 50,000 during one of these incidents is, we often like to say, barely covering, your legal team's, coffee during the time of the incident. So, both lacking in the dollars and cents, but also when you look at the language inside of these riders, it's also woefully lacking on the language itself. A good comparison is one of these riders will be, somewhere in between 15, maybe 30 pages long if you're lucky, versus one of these standalone insurance policies, which is going to be 75 to 100 pages long. And in the insurance world, you want very explicit, sometimes exhaustive language in your policy because it leaves less wiggle room for the carriers to find ways out of paying claims. In fact, that's one of the areas where this kind of stigma around cyber insurance not paying out claims is coming from. It's coming from these kind of people, filing claims against these riders, which again, typically lacking in that language. And so the carriers are kind of finagling their way out of paying these riders. And so while those riders can be pretty dang cheap, obviously, some I've seen even just like a couple $100, you gotta ask, you're getting what you're paying for, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that means absolutely nothing, versus what's very quickly becoming the most typical standalone policy purchase is going to be $1 million policy, right, compared to 50,000. And when you're looking, especially when you implement the correct tools and technologies, it's still not extraordinarily expensive to obtain at this point as well.
Cool. And what about like, crime insurance, or like how would you cover against like a rogue employee? Like where does that fall?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. And so, one of the coverages that's going to be included in those standalone policies is going to be cybercrime coverage. This is going to include things like fraudulent transfer. And it's one of the differences as you're looking into policies that you'll see between some of these carriers that are offering the better policies in the market versus some that are not. So I often tell folks it's a bit of a tiered market right now where you have these carriers that are truly, focused on cyber insurance and offering really great product at a great price. But naturally, those guys are going to have a few more requirements, technologically speaking. And you can always move down the list, so to speak, and maybe find some carriers that might not have as many technological requirements, but you're always sacrificing something, right? Whether the costs of the premiums go up, the deductibles, or one of the first things that's often dropped in those types of coverages, cybercrime coverage. You will not find that in some of those carriers that are offering those types of policies. And then for rogue employees, this is a great example. One question I will often get as well is kind of the differences between, say, cyber liability and errors and omissions, tech E&O, workers' comp. And this is going to be a workers' comp. When you have a rogue employee, right, this is typically going to come under your workers' comp. Now, there can be special events, special incidents where if you have especially sensitive data that ends up on the dark web, where that can be filed under, especially again, if you are working with one of these upper echelon carriers that have very broad coverage, that's where one of these guys can often even help you out in those cases as well. But typically, that's going to come on any of these internal aspects are going to come under your workers' comp, going to come under your errors and omissions if it was a mistake or negligence. And then the way to think about cyber liability is protection against the external, right? Third parties who are trying to actively, get in and attack.
Got it. Todd, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think John did a good job covering everything from my perspective. 3 years ago, when I had my MSP before joining ITS, we had a large account that really wanted us to have good cyber insurance protection, and they were even willing to pay some of the premium for it because it was important to them. And at the time, we had what John talked about, this rider on our standalone sort of general liability. So I started looking into it because it was like $100,000 of coverage and they wanted $1 million. So I contacted my broker, great insurance broker, but they didn't really know that wasn't their area of expertise, was cyber liability insurance. So I found a referral, and I ended up talking to a company that specialized in cyber liability insurance, like John's company. And that's where I got a really deep dive education on the difference between the rider and the cyber liability. And it really, honestly, it gave me a lot of peace of mind at that time that I had the correct policy, because I didn't want to be, in a situation where all of a sudden it's like, oh, you've only got $100,000. This is going to cost you $500,000. And it's like, well, how am I going to pay for that? So that was kind of an eye-opening experience for me at the time. And I felt very confident after going through that process that I actually had the right coverage. So
cool. So sounds like bolt-on riders, not really the way to go. Standalone seems to be the way to go, and then work with specialists. Kind of take-home points, I'd say.
Couldn't agree more.
Cool. Let's dive into kind of, Todd, does a small business really need to get cyber insurance? How critical?
Yeah, I mean, I've asked that question myself. I mean, obviously, I did that for my small business a few years ago, but thinking through, one thing to keep in mind is insurance doesn't in and of itself like prevent the problem, but it's sort of that last stopgap to protect the business itself if there's a significant event. And but one of the things I learned through this whole process is, one, obviously it's ultimately a transfer of risk. John mentioned sort of the criteria that they're now looking for, which didn't always exist in the past, but now it's becoming more and more stringent. And really, I mean, I'm in favor of that stringency, because ultimately it helps the business protect themselves on a day-to-day basis anyway. These are cybersecurity best practices that we preach to our clients and our prospects every single day. And it's a good thing to have that discussion to make informed decisions about how do we best protect our operation, what's the right, what's our budget for this, and so on. I think that the other thing that's important to realize is, if there is an event, you're not necessarily out there in the cold by yourself. The insurance company, as part of that standalone policy, is also going to have some incident response built in. They're going to have some forensic teams come in. If you don't have that coverage and you have a bad day, that bad day can turn into a bad month. And trying to recover data and trying to figure out, like, what do I do next, and how do I fix this? And you're bringing in your IT team or your outsourced provider, and they're trying to figure it out. These better insurance companies will have some plans in place that can be deployed quickly and get the company recovered. So that would be another benefit of having a good cyber insurance policy. And that's one of the things we discover is, a lot of times, if our clients do have coverage or prospects, it's maybe not always the right policy. And so it merits at least taking a look at it and making sure that you're covered, and not getting surprised after the fact, and realizing that you're underinsured.
Yeah. Cool. John, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I like to tell people to think about, insurance is after an event, and that goes for really any type of insurance, right? Fire insurance is not going to prevent that fire, right? It's just going to help you out when that fire actually occurs. The cyber is no different, right? It's to help you rebuild after the incident has occurred. The tools and technologies are there to help mitigate that incident from occurring in the first place. That's why we're seeing these tools and technologies pop up as requirements from cyber insurance carriers, right? And the real goal is to help you get back up and running as fast as possible, and is why they have folks like, Breach Coast law firms to come in and help guide you through that whole process.
Cool. So we've heard about threats, and we've heard about the kind of the role of insurance. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about how these kind of fit together. John, how do you see cyber insurance and technology stack solutions, kind of how do they come together to form a robust security strategy for a business?
Yeah, and really leads nicely from what I was just saying. It's truly about the balance of the two. It's, the tools and technologies on the front end to mitigate the potential severity and frequency of these events, balanced, by the transfer of that tail end of risk to cyber insurance, right? It's the same with, any other industry. But what I've really liked to see recently is the synergy between the tools and technology and insurance. They're really starting to communicate nicely. And when you look at any other industry, insurance is really driving things like compliancy. Seatbelts started becoming a thing because insurance companies required it. All that good stuff is going to happen for the cyber insurance space as well. And we're really starting to see the communication between the two, which is, I think, personally really good.
So now that we kind of have a good understanding of the risk, maybe we can pivot to like what's the right policy for your business, because I know it's pretty daunting to kind of figure out what it is that you need. So John, any advice you have for businesses looking to find the right policy that aligns with their specific needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, again, as we mentioned, an unstandardized market. So you actually even have some carriers that are more focused on certain size, working with certain sizes of companies. Some carriers like certain industries more than other carriers. And so truly working with an expert, somebody like a DataStream who has access to a large portion of the market. DataStream has 40 plus carriers we work with so that we can truly go out there and find you the best possible policy at the best price, right? Working with you to figure out, based on your personal risk, which options out there are going to best fit you and your budget.
What's the average cost that a small business can expect to pay for like a typical $1 million policy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, it's a tougher one. So it's a bit of a range that I like to give because it is dependent on, which level of carrier is offering the policy. But we like to say for your typical SMB, and again, $1 million policy is very quickly become the kind of de facto policy. It's in between a $2,000 and $8,000 range. That's just going to be dependent on both the size, the industry of the company, as well as, again, if you have better internal posture, it opens the doors to those better carriers who typically are at the lower end of that cost spectrum.
Gotcha. So Todd, kind of pivoting off of that, what are some gotchas that a small business might run into when they're looking to get that policy? Like, what are some things that they want to make sure they are aware of?
Yeah, well, part of this is, kind of the advent of the insurance questionnaire that we often see as IT service providers, where a client will say, hey, I'm looking at getting cyber insurance, or I have it, but I'm getting a renewal. Can you go through this questionnaire and answer the question? And so that list has grown over the last few years, where it used to be almost nothing. And now it's starting to cover more and more what essentially are best practices. So we kind of mentioned them before. Probably the number one thing would be multi-factor authentication on at least your email, because email is typically the number one vector that's the easiest to get into the castle walls, if you will, and start poking around. And so what happens is someone gets a fake email to reset their Office 365 password, but that's not even real. And then somebody's playing around, but if in your environment and looking for things. And so if you have that multi-factor, then that's a good preventative. And unfortunately, the percentage of companies that actually have that employed right now is pretty low. I want to say it's 30 or 35% or something like that. Other things are like endpoint detection and response, or MDR. These are a bunch of alphabet soup acronyms, but they're acronyms, but they're kind of the forefront of cyber risk mitigation these days. So some real-time alerting and protection against a nefarious or anomalous behavior. That's kind of the new thing. Security awareness training is pretty huge. And some of these top tier carriers will actually have that type of training available as part of the policy. As part of the policy, I recall that our policy in my company had that. This sounds kind of old school, but offsite backups. You can't just have a backup at the location. You need to have it safely moved off site as well. That covers other things too, like, building damage or a fire or flood or whatever. But also, here's a big one. You have to have those backups tested on a regular basis to ensure that they actually work. If you're not testing backups, then you can't really say you have backups. So this is kind of technical, and just kind of a general, cyber protection shift in your company environment. This is the foundation of having a good, solid IT environment you don't have to worry about.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you want to make sure you're filling out these questionnaires accurately, and it should be signed off by an officer of the company, not just the IT person or the IT provider. If you have a third-party company sign off on your IT environment, the officer of the company needs to sign that, and they also need to understand what are they actually signing. If there is an event, there could be an investigation, and there have been situations where a company was covered, but they didn't actually have MFA employed, and that's how the bad guys got in. And the insurance company, I think the case I read, they actually paid out on the insurance, but it was a big mess, and made the problem worse rather than trying to make it as good as possible.
Yeah. Well, cool. So we're getting close on time here, so I want to be sensitive to that. So let's talk about some real life examples here. Maybe Todd, if you want to talk through a CPA example briefly.
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking about this situation, I remember a few years ago, I was talking to our CPA in my company, and we were talking about, cybersecurity and risk mitigation. And she said, oh yeah, I remember one of my clients, so a small law firm, 2 attorneys, I think it might've been about 10 employees. And this kind of speaks to, we're too small to be targeted. That's just not true. In fact, it might be the opposite, that small businesses are a juicier target because they're less likely to have, good security practices in place. It was an example of business email compromise where someone got into their email, was monitoring discussions between the 2 partners of the firm, and it was end of year, and they were doing an end of year profit distribution, and at the last minute, there was a wire transfer instruction change from one partner to the other. The other partner didn't even think to pick up the phone and confirm. They just went ahead and did it. And I believe it was about $175,000 wired offshore somewhere. And I don't think they ever got the money back. So that was maybe an entire year of their profits that were essentially stolen through fraud. And that's really what this is. It's just modern tools to execute fraud schemes.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about some next steps, and then we'll get to Q&A. So as far as next steps go, if you like to fast track your cyber insurance conversation, we're here to help you. Feel free to send an email to secure@itsasap.com, and we'll get you started on a cyber insurance review. We'll be able to work, if you have an existing policy and you want a second set of eyes, to see if there's any gaps or any modifications, please let us know. We'll go ahead and work with John and get that policy reviewed for you as part of a free offer here. If you don't have insurance yet and need to get started, again, please reach out and we'll go ahead and get that conversation started with DataStream, and they can go ahead and give you a list of various policies that are going to meet your particular needs there. Otherwise, we'll be in touch on the back end here. Follow up with either your client account manager or sales rep, and be happy to keep that conversation going. Let's see, we have a question. One question came in from Nicole. What type of training is available to put out to employees as part of a new orientation to help them understand the cyber risks out there and how important this awareness is? Should I ask a potential carrier? So I'll kind of take a stab at that. So that's part of one of our offerings is our kind of ITS Secure package that includes cybersecurity awareness training program as a help to kind of raise the level of awareness across your teams. Also happy to have that conversation offline with that, Nicole. All right, I keep going here. Let's see, so a couple other questions have come in. So I want to just, for time here, go ahead and get those questions answered. Question for Todd and John. what are some cost-effective security measures we can implement immediately? I think we kind of touched on a couple of those things. Anything you want to add above and beyond?
I mean, again, I would say the two easiest ones for sure would be implementing MFA, MFA solution on at least your email. And in fact, if you're on Office 365, there is a basic MFA that's really essentially no additional cost. I believe you have to have a certain license level. There would be some cost in getting it kind of configured and set up. And then the other one would be some sort of a security awareness training program. There's a number of vendors that have solutions where they're essentially producing content that train staff on a regular basis with infographics, or there's a number of different styles, or they're actually sending out emails that are crafted to look like phishing, like typical phishing emails. The nice thing about that is if someone clicks on a link in what should be a suspicious email, it prompts a little bit of focus and, hey, you know what, you probably should have not clicked on that link, and there's some additional training to go along with that. So you can kind of identify people that need a little bit more guidance. Those are the things that we found to be most effective.
Cool. Another question came in: how do we test our daily backup? So I think if you're an ITS client, that ITS will go ahead and be testing that backup on a regular basis. I think that maybe we can circle back off that offline, make sure that that report is getting back to you. So we can go ahead and circle back on that. Another question came in: who do we contact for needs analysis of our main company? If we're talking about a risk assessment, or we're talking about a cyber insurance review, in either case, if you want to drop a line to secure at ITS ASAP, happy to go ahead and start that conversation offline with you. All right. Another question came in, John, this is for you. What's involved in a claim process in the event of a cyber incident?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the first call during any sort of incident, as soon as somebody has, an inkling that an incident has occurred, is always to, if you have cyber insurance, is always going to be to a forensic team, a breach coach law firm. And these are the guys who are going to hop on, walk you through the first steps of the actual incident, the claim, let you know how serious the incident is. They'll also be the ones to help you connect in with the forensics teams, the PR teams, if you need to do any reputation rebuilding. So that's always the very first step. Typically, the carriers themselves have some sort of hotline for you. Here at DataStream, we take it a step further as a brokerage and actually give you a hotline to one of the best breach coach law firms in the country, Mullen and Coughlin, so that you always have, somebody you can jump on the horn with. The first call is always free, so you have no worries on that end. So yeah, that's always the first step during claim, and they are the ones who kind of walk you through those next steps and connect you in with the next team.
Excellent. See if there's any other questions. Got one more. Answered that one. We'll give it another couple of minutes here if anybody else would like to submit any other questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap things up here. All right. Well, I guess with that, we'll wrap things up. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for your attendance, and appreciate all the questions. So big thank you. We'll be sending out some valuable content to registered attendees. So we'll get a couple of checklist FAQ they'll send out along with the recording of the webinar. And then also just to let you know about some stuff that's upcoming. So we're going to be continuing to do a webinar series as we head into the new year. So we're going to be doing some kind of vertical specific webinars, nonprofit, healthcare, manufacturing, financial services. We also got some incident response planning on the slate. So that'll be coming soon. So stay tuned for some invitations that'll be going out for those topics. Let's continue to stay informed. Wishing you and your family a really restful and peaceful holiday season. And just want to say thank you and have a great rest of your day. And thanks, Todd and John, for the great information.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. That was a lot of fun.
All right, awesome.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great day. Take care.
Absolutely.
Right.
Good one, everybody.